Welcome back to Restless. My name is Father Joseph Gill, priest of the Diocese of Bridgeport, and you've joined Paul, Joe, and Angelicas. Together, we young adults restlessly seek the face of Christ in the midst of today's crazy and mixed up world. And one of the ways in which our world is crazy and mixed up, I think there's probably 1,000 ways, but one of them is in our understanding of our country and our kind of this virtue of patriotism, or is it a virtue? So I know, like in a lot of schools, we're kind of taught almost to kind of despise our country and see all of its flaws. But what does patriotism mean? Should we be patriotic as Catholics? Because I think our faith and our country really kind of probably do have some sort of connection with one another. So I guess for the first question, and I'm like throwing like 17 questions at you all at once. What is patriotism? What is it? How would you define it?
I think that generally, in the rest of the world outside the United States, there's a bit of a synonym between patriotism and nationalism, where it's supporting one's country, believing in its. We would define it in the United States as believing in the country's values and the values of the people, provided that those are good. And
that's the question: is what is an American value?
I think it's it's the first line of the Declaration of Independence, since we believe in all men are created equal. And endowed with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are unalienable rights, and that's the foundation of the country. And supporting that and defending those rights, and upholding them, believing them, and living them out is part of American patriotism. I think where we would, in the United States at least, disassociate that from nationalism is when we would talk about the National Socialist movement in Germany, which would be Nazism, right? Which is a nationalist movement where they're believing in a country that's not living up to good values that we might say if you were to define the U.S.'s core values as good. And so we would define that as nationalism. They might actually see it as what we would call patriotism, but I think we've made that distinction in the U.S. vernacular.
Yeah, and maybe a bit broader than just in America, right? Like patriotism really is a natural extension of the love you have for your family, right? So you love your family because they're close to you and because you owe them things and because you have gratitude for that they sort of sustain you in existence. And it's the same thing with your country in a lot of ways, right?
Does that word patriotism come from pater? Father?
I assume so.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Father. Well, yeah, father. It would be
fatherland.
Fatherland. Yeah.
Yeah. He who's always quoted, right, Chesterton, said about patriotism that people first paid honor to a spot and afterwards gained glory for it. So men did not love Rome because she was great. She was great because they had loved her. I think that's interesting because it's easy, I think, for Americans to say, well, we believe in these things, like these precepts, and that's great, but it wouldn't explain why somebody from China might be patriotic even if they oppose their government, or somebody from Kenya would be patriotic even if there are no Kenyan values, or I don't know if there aren't, but it kind of goes beyond ideology. It's easy for Americans to view it that way, I think. But it really has to do just with the natural love you have for those the natural preference you have for those who are close to you and those who are familiar to you.
Well, we'll get back to that question of loving our country, is that the same as loving our government? How do you despise, not like our government, but love our country? How do you do that? But wait, I want to go back to Paul's point, because Paul said that the fundamental value is that first line, all men are created equal. But okay, that's not been practiced in terms of slavery and now abortion, where we're not having everyone equal. But B, I don't know that that's a specifically American value.
Well, that's precisely right.
And America didn't write it.
Yeah, that's precisely right. And I think that's why that concept is enshrined in our documents. And as Frederick Douglass said, and Martin Luther King repeated on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, is that the founders signed a promissory note to the enslaved people at the time, and then they cashed that promissory note eventually
through the civil rights
through the Civil War, and then further after the end of Jim Crow and the civil rights movement. But without that, it's hard to see the end of it's probably a more bitter end to the end of slavery and Jim Crow in this country potentially. Because we're not alone. The last country to end slavery was Brazil in 1886 or something like that. It was like 30 years after.
And it's still common throughout the world.
Yeah, right. And it's not gone away. It's not legal anywhere in the world, but it's still practiced in the world, right? So,
right.
So I think that's what that would be my response to. Yes, we haven't lived up to those values all the time, but they're still our values, and we strive to accomplish. Now, when we talk about life, I agree with that, and that's the shame, and that's where you'd say, well, it's not love of government because the government is doing allowing these things, but it's the values. And maybe maybe to some extent it's the love of the people that are around you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if people would add to those values the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess really it was not just that all men are created equal, but I think the freedom aspect is what made America ultimately what made it in the first place, right?
Yeah, well, those two
tyranny.
phrases are linked together. Like all men are created equal, and therefore they're endowed with these unalienable rights. Like they're actually they're tied, right? Because if all men aren't created equal, then they all wouldn't be entitled to these rights.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
so I believe it's all one sentence in this Constitution, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Or not Constitution, sorry, Declaration.
Okay. Now, Angelica, you kind of have a unique perspective because your parents are immigrants from El Salvador, right? El Salvador, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, they obviously love America, right? I'm assuming. I mean, they're here. I hope they love America.
They do. They do love America. They, I don't know if they'd regard it as their like homeland. I don't know if they'd regard their country, El Salvador, as their homeland, though. Well,
I remember asking your parents one time, would you ever like to go back and visit? And
no.
I think
No.
your mom said yes, and your dad said absolutely not, never. Because I know there has been a great war down there, a civil war, which is what led them here in the first place.
My mom came over when she was like 15, if not younger. She's been here for most of her life now.
Your dad was a little later?
Yes, because he's 5 years older. So.
Okay.
Yeah,
But I mean, do you see yourself as primarily American or primarily El Salvadorian? Or both?
I think a little bit of both. It depends on why I'm saying it, who I'm talking to, how I'm feeling.
Well, I think that's one of those things that's great about the United States. And we have this unique culture where, or maybe I think it's fading a bit, but we have this unique culture where you can maintain your ethnic identity, but it's completely compatible with also being like a patriotic American and love of country and the people in the country and wanting to defend it and wanting to defend the freedoms that we have and things like that.
Yeah, we really are the only country that have hyphenated. You're Italian American, you're Irish American,
Yeah, you see it in Australia actually.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, you see. I don't know.
That's
you see that. And also Canada, like all the
English expats.
all the prior British colonies, including the United States, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's we were at one time. That's for sure. That's funny because I'm a mutt. I'm mostly French, but we've been in this country since the 1860s, and so I would never call myself a French American, mainly because Joe would make fun of me endlessly.
But naturally, not calling yourself French American doesn't stop me. So one wonders what you're truly gaining.
What's funny is that when
Joe thinks that French people we can surrender at everything.
A lot of Americans that were born in this country and maybe for several generations still identify as French Canadian, which I always found was.
Oh, that is true. That's a whole nother.
Because it's a whole different culture.
That's a separate question of nationalism, at least in Quebec, right?
Yeah,
well, that's actually a good point, though, is that the Quebecois have a sense of nationalism for their own, or not all of them, but there's a group that want to separate from Canada, or at least want to maintain their culture as best as they can in their language.
Yeah, that was one of the most interesting things for me when I hiked El Camino many years ago across northern Spain, and the first part of that is going through Basque country. And the Basques, I mean, you could see like even graffiti on the bridges, just like free Basque country. They wanted it to be separated from Spain because it had such an identity that they're like, this is not my country. I don't believe in Spain. I believe in the Basque.
They have their own language.
They do. Yeah, they do. But and also Galicia, the other side of the country.
And Catalonia.
Yeah.
Spain has got a sordid history.
Well, California is a little different than the rest of the country too.
Oh, well, yeah, that's true.
We wish they would split off. No, I'm just kidding to any of our California listeners.
I mean, it's the 9th largest economy in the world or something like that. But
is it really? Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. That's crazy. So let's go back to Joe's point because, he was talking about kind of the distinction between loving our country and loving our government. So how can you love a country that's so flawed? And every country is flawed. I don't want to single out America because no matter where you live in the world, I mean, everyone's like, well, there's no country better than America. I'm like, I don't know, Poland seems pretty good.
Poland's got its issues.
Yeah.
Poland's got it.
Sorry,
Yeah,
everyone's got its issues.
see, I would live in Malta because they all speak English and it's 98% Catholic.
Malta.
Like, that's a pretty good deal. It's a tiny little island.
No, I know.
Yeah, it looks beautiful too.
Yeah.
But how can you love a country that's flawed?
Well, I mean, it comes down to how you define love, right? And if you think that love is a set of fuzzy feelings you have towards something, then you can't. But that's not what love is, right? I mean, C.S. Lewis talks about how love really is a choice. You choose to love something, and then you end up, if you choose to love something and act like you love it, you will find that eventually you do love it, right? This comes from mere Christianity. And so it's kind of the same thing with your country. At least it can be. I mean, you don't have to feel affection for your current government or its current policies, your current leaders, but if you choose to love your country and act like you do, you will find that you do. And that comes down to like liking your own countrymen and women and not talking disparagingly about them just because they disagree with you about something, or saying, well, these people from that area are bad and different from us and stuff like that. Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. No, but absolutely.
I actually love West Virginia.
Well, but I mean, the looking down one's nose at people like those who are from West Virginia, I mean, that is a sort of anti-patriotic thing, right?
Yeah, that's certainly true.
Yeah.
Although we may be the country that probably has the most diverse, population in terms of West Virginia and New York and California are three completely different people.
Yeah, I would
sense,
probably argue that there's countries in Africa and even like in Asia that have, like, especially China, that have far greater diversity.
Oh, that's true, with all the different tribes and things.
Yeah, it's United States is also very diverse, but in just like very different ways.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Not as
We all speak
dark.
English.
Yeah.
Except Alabamans.
Why they speak
They speak
they speak
speak
Alabama.
redneck down there.
Oh, okay. Well, that's creative.
Sorry, is that racist? Against my own people?
No, I don't think Alabamans is a race.
Oh, okay.
I don't think you
just
can
thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, moving on.
You can't claim Alabama when you're from Maryland, Father.
I know, right?
It's a big stretch.
But I think
fair.
it's important to differentiate between, and I think it's a very American thing, and we're all Americans, so it's not particularly surprising that we're talking about that, is that when we talk about, I think a lot of people have, especially immigrants and things, they have love of their country, their countrymen, let's say, but they don't have a sense of, like, I come from an Italian family, and they never, my Italian, like the immigrants that we knew, like, they never talked about like how fondly they loved Italy as a country, right? Especially since they considered themselves Sicilian or Pugliese or like these different areas. They didn't consider themselves Italian. But United States is very unique in that we have this, we have a love of what America represents, right, in the world, and we have a love of our countrymen at the same time. And I think that's what differentiates us from just a love of the people.
I wonder too, when God loves us, he loves us for who we are, but he also loves us for who we can become. Because he being outside of time, he knows that we're, God willing, going to make it to heaven and the glory that we're going to be in heaven. And so I wonder if it's something similar, that we recognize the flaws in our country and we love the country, but also we love the perfect version of the country.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
also
sees
I think,
potential.
and you had asked, like, why would we love something that's so flawed? It's like, well, we love other humans and we're, like, terrible, flawed. Everyone's terribly flawed. So, but we love them.
That's true.
Right, and the church has flaws. We love it.
That is true.
And just how when you love somebody, you end up realizing that the thing that their flaw is actually your flaw too. Like what you dislike in others most is always true about you. And like when you love your country, you realize that the problems it has that you think are external to you are actually like you're bound up in them and you are the source of them. It's like, oh, well, my country is good, but there's all these problems with it that like other people are causing. It's like, no, you are your country. Like you're part of the body politic. Like you are part of the problem that you see. Right.
Well, there was that philosopher from ancient Rome, I forget who it was, who said that in a democracy, you get the kind of leaders you deserve. So if you have a very virtuous, holy, God-centered populace, then you'll get a virtuous, holy, God-centered leader. And if you're not virtuous and holy, you get, scuds at buckets.
That's right. Well, yeah, I mean, that's what Tocqueville said about our democracy is you can, it's good if you can keep it. And if it's relying on the fact that you have a God-fearing people.
Right.
And
even George Washington said only virtuous people can keep this democracy.
Right. And George Washington said the same thing. He reverberated it in his last speech there. So I think it's really important that we recognize that. But in terms of, when we think about love, it's willing the good, right? And so I think you do want to will the good. If wherever you are, if you're in a situation where you can't move, you still want to make sure you're doing what you can to will the good of where you happen to be. And that might be very challenging and it might be impossible. And that's where you might want to consider leaving and going to some place where you can do that.
Yeah.
Father, can I raise something somewhat related to this question? because we're talking about like loving your country when it's flawed, and I think Catholics have a unique perspective on this because the American history for a very long time was very hostile toward the Catholic presence here and Catholic influence on it.
When did it stop? Go on.
Right. Well, yeah. So that's an interesting question, but
probably in
did
the 1950s it did stop.
Yeah.
And that was one of the worst things that happened in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, right. But I just think it's interesting because, I mean, I learned recently that not only, so there were, I think, maybe 2 founding fathers at the actual Constitutional Convention who were Catholic, but it turns out that...
I thought it was only one.
I think it may have been 2.
John Carroll.
Yeah, so at least him, right? Cousin, I believe, of one of the first bishops in America, or the first bishop in America.
The first bishop was John Carroll. Charles Carroll.
Right.
Was the
but it
signer.
turns out that one of the, I guess, like the stenographers or whatever at the convention who's keeping notes was also a Catholic.
Oh, really?
But, I mean, there are all these awful stereotypes about how Catholics are going to build a tunnel to Rome so they can get their orders from the Pope. And you see all these sort of ridiculous political cartoons of alligators with miters as mouths and stuff like that. But it's interesting because, I mean, again, because like Paul sort of indicated, like that anti-Catholicism does sort of linger in some important ways. And yeah, I still feel like I love my country, right? And so it's how do you reconcile the fact that, a country which has historically hated my religion and hated, the Church of Christ, that I also love it, right? It's interesting, like, how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah.
I think that there's, it's true, and I think humans are flawed, right? So you have a flawed organization created by flawed people, but even through that, you can still have good values that come out of it.
Yeah, the government, not the church. The church was not created by flawed people.
The government. I'm talking about the government. The government of the United States, and it's filled with flawed people.
Yeah,
right? Yeah, and
definitely.
And we did the best we could.
Yeah,
but I mean, yeah, it's true. But it's not just unique to the United States. I mean, I think Ireland is the only country where it's English-speaking country where Catholicism is not the minority, and Ireland's Catholic in scare quotes. But
Sadly, yeah.
but it's true. If you look at Australia and all the other English-speaking countries, it's a minority Christian expression.
Yeah,
it's probably the biggest denomination in most countries, but it's not as big as Protestantism.
So then, is it a virtue then in our Catholic faith to be patriotic? I mean, would that be considered a virtue?
Provided that it's toward the right end. Right, because if you're patriotic in the sense that you're not living up to the values that we would consider good, and you're trying to support things that aren't, going back to more of that nationalism, then I would say that that's not a virtue.
And I would say there's some American values not elucidated in the Declaration, such as our capitalistic greed, the American dream, quote unquote, that kind of do go against some of our Catholic values.
Well, even those mentioned. I mean, I am a pro-freedom person, but I mean, the sort of radical obsession with my own autonomy is not Catholic.
So individualism.
But individualism is one thing, but the idea that there can be nothing that infringes on my ability to do whatever I want. I mean, that's not only is that crazy, but that's deeply not Catholic, right? I mean, the idea that you have obligations to anybody unless you choose to have them is just wrong.
Well,
right?
I think it's individualism from the separation from the government. And because we have a secular government, that's where I would say, well, that's probably good. And if you read the writings of George Washington, he's very clear. He's very humble. If you read his writings, he's very humble toward his relationship with God. And that was at least his premise, was that you can't be subjugated to a king, a tyrannical king, and also subjugated to God. Like that doesn't work very well.
Yeah, but I don't think American radical. Like the radical American focus on autonomy does not end with our view of government. Like I think it extends to our view of private relationships and employers and business owners, right? I mean, the idea that you would have to I don't know. I mean, the idea that a business owner would be required to take a coupon 6 months after it expired because you decide they need to. I mean, I find that or things like that. The idea that the idea that the world revolves around you and that. Anything that infringes on your ability to do whatever you want at any given moment. I mean, this is a bit of a caricature of American individuality, but I do think there's a strain of that, and that is what I'm talking about, not just the government.
There definitely is. I had a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, I took a group of high school boys and their dads to Rome, which was a great pilgrimage. We really enjoyed it, but the stereotype of the ugly American was so visible in these boys who had no concept that you're in a foreign country and you have to respect their culture, so they'd be walking down the streets of Rome singing at the top of their lungs all these silly American songs, and everyone's staring at them, and I'm like, guys, shut up. Like we have to blend in. Like
when in Rome.
When in Rome, exactly, do as the Romans do. And it was just this idea of like, we're Americans, so we do whatever the heck we want wherever we go. And I was like, no. It was so embarrassing, and it made them big targets for pickpocketers. Thankfully, nothing happened, but you could see everybody kind of looking at them like,
easy marks.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious, Angelica, because you've been quiet this whole time, and but when talking about like kind of having to like fit into a country, like does your family still keep any El Salvadorian traditions?
Yeah, we do. Just because it's kind of been passed down, it's something that my parents did when they were younger, so it's just like a little part of it. What was your question again?
What kind of traditions? Like I know around Christmas you do the posada.
The posadas, yeah.
Wait, what is that?
It's a novena leading up to Christmas.
Oh, okay, cool.
You go around to different houses and kind of reenact Joseph, Mary, and Jesus looking for.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I've heard of that. I didn't know that's what it's called. Yeah, that's cool.
Other thing, I feel like it revolves around food, so I'm not sure how much of a tradition that is. Yeah.
But of course, you've adopted so many American traditions too, like 4th of July, you go and shoot fireworks, or.
I think for the most part, though, as I've listened to you all talk so much.
Sorry.
No. I'm realizing more and more, like I don't necessarily view myself as like, I'm not gonna go out and say, oh, I'm an American or oh, I'm Salvadorian, unless I'm asked. And it's kind of just like a backseat kind of thing, because I don't know, something about like just where I am and being happy here and not feeling frustrated enough that I want to leave is keeps me happy, and it keeps me grounded where I am, and it gives me a confidence that this is where the Lord wants me to be. And
here in America.
Yeah, so
that's good. So
this is my like stomping ground for evangelization until He makes me move somewhere or He calls me elsewhere.
Yeah, true.
So I'm gonna love where I am, and respect it, and do it to the best of my ability, even though I don't know much about it.
That's okay.
So,
but as you're talking, it makes me think, as Catholics, we really are strangers in a strange land, because our real home is heaven.
Right.
Right. And so that's my fundamental identity. So whether I'm here or live in a different country, like my identity doesn't change, because my identity is not based on my race, my nationality. It's based on my faith in Jesus Christ. And you can be Catholic everywhere.
Yeah.
It means universal, after all.
Yeah.
So let's shift to a kind of another closely related topic to that patriotism, is like, how do you live that out? And one way you can live that out, of course, is joining the armed forces. Have you ever considered that for your own life?
Briefly.
Really?
Yeah, there was a time when I was really frustrated at work. This is post, and I was thinking about doing Air Force. I can only do Air Force given my physical stature. And I was thinking about doing Air Force OTS, kind of leaving my
What is OTS?
Oh, Officer Training School.
Okay.
So I already had a college degree. I already had a couple years experience, and I was like, I could be a finance officer in the Air Force. It's a thrilling position, let me tell you. I actually know a finance officer now. And
why wouldn't you just want to fly planes?
Well, I can't because of my eyes.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, and my physical stature I don't think is supportive of that either. It's very physically demanding being a fighter pilot or any type of pilot.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's hard. As an Air Force pilot, yeah.
I mean, I know you pull a lot of G-force.
Well, as a fighter pilot. I mean, they have all different types of pilots.
Someone's got to just transport the cargo.
That's right. But again, it's very phically demanding. Anyway, I looked into this a lot. Yeah. It's not, none of these are easy positions. So anyway, I looked into that, but I've always had a little bit of like a regret of not doing it or not looking into it more.
It is a great career. You retire at 55 and
It can be. It's hard though. It's a slog. A lot of most guys don't make it.
Well, a lot of times too, you have to go wherever they send you, right?
Anywhere.
So-
Yeah. As you get more seniority, I think you get a bit more say in that. But
Yeah.
I mean, I've known like, graduate second lieutenants, and they send them wherever they can, and wherever they'll go, they'll send them anywhere. And sometimes they'll change you every year, and it's it can be hard.
Yeah, I mean, I never seriously thought about joining the military. I was in JROTC when I was in high school, so that was great. And that gave me a good perspective on how the military actually works.
What is, for our listeners, what is JROTC stand for?
So ROTC is what you do in college, which is Reserve Officer Training Corps. So that's like somebody who's doing ROTC is doing it primarily so that they can become an officer. And then if you get a scholarship, you're required to spend some time in the armed forces to kind of pay down the scholarship. JROTC just means Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps. So mine was NJROTC, which is Navy Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps. So
The Navy, all of the military loves acronyms.
love acronyms.
So
Yep.
much.
So, but anyway, so we were Navy Junior Reserve Officer Training. It was great. It was a huge thing in my high school. I'm sure you remember, because every high school, especially every freshman boy, does.
There's like 25% of the student body did that, which is
it must have been more than that. I mean, of the freshman years, because people drop off. Of the freshmen, I've got to figure 2/3 of the guys did, if I had to guess.
Which school is that?
Bethel High. Yeah, we have it.
Oh, really? Bethel High?
Yeah, we had. So Bethel
it's the biggest one in the state, isn't it?
One of the bigger ones, yeah, which is weird because it's not a particularly important high school, but we're huge, and our two naval science instructors were very good, and it was a great program, and I appreciate that it gave me a different perspective on the country and on the armed forces.
You go to a whole boot camp weekend, and it's intense.
And because I did that, I have a lot of friends who did ROTC in college, and I have friends who are in the armed forces when just got back from a tour in Africa and stuff like that. So
wow.
And so it gave me a good perspective, but it also made me realize that it was not for me, which is fine.
That's fair.
It was I did it in that capacity, and I enjoyed it, and it was good. But
That's awesome. I've thought at great length of becoming a military chaplain, because I love adventure. I love being outdoors, and I know the need is huge. My brother was in the Navy for 4 years, and I think he said he saw a priest maybe every 9 months.
Really?
Because he was in a ship, off the coast of Japan.
Well, I know that bishops are not as willing to give up their priests anymore, right?
Yeah, it's getting tougher. It's getting tougher.
Because I know a priest in my home parish of St. Bridget in Cheshire, one of the priests there, he went into, I forget which branch, I think he ended up in Air Force for 4, and he's going away for 4 years.
Oh wow,
Wow. So, and Bishop was like, Archbishop was like, okay,
yeah,
better come back.
For me, the reason I didn't do it, 2 reasons why I didn't do it. One is, I struggle dealing with bureaucracy, and there's no bigger bureaucracy than the military.
well, except for the Catholic Church.
Except for the Catholic Church. But our diocese, actually, our bureaucracy is very small and very efficient, I have to say, compared to most. So we're very blessed. But the other thing is that the military has become very politically correct. And I would find that to be a real challenge and a real struggle, because as a military chaplain, you can't judge, and there's certain truths perhaps you couldn't teach. If somebody came to you and was like, I'm transgender, you have to accept it. You can't be like, I don't really believe in that. So I was like, I'm gonna probably get kicked out if I join, because I would just speak my mind, and you really have to be able to work within that system right now, currently. So
Depends on who's president too. It actually does.
that is true. No, that is absolutely
Commander
true.
in chief, makes a big difference.
I mean, Trump had passed some sort of law banning transgender troops, right? And then Biden brought.
No. He sent out a tweet. Then he got distracted. That's not a law. And the Department of Defense said that was not legally binding, and we're waiting for their instruction, which they never received, as far as I'm aware.
Oh, is that the case? That's what happened.
As I remember, yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep. It turns out our military policy is not made on Twitter. Who would have thought?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Shocking.
I thought that's how he did all his business. Anyway, have you ever thought about that? About military life?
Yeah, briefly, but it was because it got my mom's attention, so I used it when I was younger a little bit.
Pretty good.
Nice.
Yeah, it was, and then I forgot about it. I don't even know what really happened. I think she stopped paying attention to it, and then yeah.
So, did you have any actual desire, or was it just to?
No, not.
That's honest.
No.
Yeah.
That's really funny.
Yep.
But it is such a noble calling, and there have been some great saints who are soldiers. Of course, Saint Martin of Tours, Saint Nereus, one of my favorites. He was a Praetorian Guard.
That's cool.
A couple American chaplains who were up for canonization.
Emile Capone, one.
Father Emile Capone and Father Vincent Capodanno, who was in the Vietnam War. Both of those chaplains are up for hopefully canonization. So you can definitely become a saint as a soldier, and there needs to be holy people fighting for our country as well.
For sure.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's one great way to love your country. Of course, there's a lot of other ways too, to certainly pray for our country and our leaders, which we should be doing every day. Voting, getting involved in the political process, whether locally or nationally, and just living your life as a good citizen, a good part of the community. I think is so important. So thank you for joining us on this episode of Restless. Go and love your country, pray for your country, and be a good citizen as much as we can, because as Catholics, we are called to love the land that gave us birth. Thanks for joining us. You can find us on Veritas Catholic Network, 1350 AM, and wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in next time. God bless you.